Shauna, let's talk about Beto O'Rourke for a second, because he raised more than $38 million in the third quarter, which our Mark Murray pointed out is more than Barack Obama raised in the quarter right before Iowa and New Hampshire in 2008, which is obviously there's some differences in online fundraising now, but that's a pretty stunning number. That has led to some hand-wringing about, well, hey, wouldn't that money be better used in some of these other races that actually might be closer?
Yeah, I think that's one of those issues. And also, we have to say that the Republican Party, the Democratic Party, the DSCC, isn't really putting a lot of money into Texas. And part of that is basically none. And part of that is because Beto has been so successful in raising money, especially from outside of Texas. I mean, I think the question for them is that if I'm sure they're not asking this question because they would never say he's going to lose if you talk to his campaign. But if he loses, what do you use some of the rest of that money for in terms of setting up the Democratic Party for the next 2, 4, 6, 8 years? And I am interested in seeing what they do about that if he were to lose.
But you have 3 very interesting races in Texas for the House. You have Culberson, you have Pete Sessions, you have Hurd as well, in districts where you have a lot of Hispanic voters. And right there, those 3 races, they're pretty much very tight.
Well, and that's also a situation where having Beto at the top of the ticket also could mean that you pull some of those House races out for Democrats in a certain way.
Right.
You also
have all both.
Exactly, but you also have Greg Abbott at the top of the ticket on the gubernatorial side.
But I think that's part of what Democrats as well are counting on, and I don't think that we count Beto out quite yet because we haven't factored in the 8 million new registrations that are not factoring in these polls, and it is going to pull some of those Democrats through in these key seats.
But have we seen any poll? I know they've been close where Beto has been ahead. I think the vast majority, Ted Cruz has been ahead. So I just don't see. Look, Ted Cruz is going to win, but he should be winning by 2 digits, not by 1 digit. I think that's the story in Texas.
Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor, subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Meet the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.